Marcus laughed dismissively when the maid said, "Your mother is just confused, sir." Eleanor stood shivering outside in the snow, tears frozen on her cheeks. What Marcus discovered next made his blood run cold forever. The December wind howled through the bare oak trees as Marcus pulled his black BMW into the circular driveway of his sprawling suburban home. Snowflakes danced in the headlight beams, creating a winter wonderland that should have felt magical. But something felt wrong. The house stood too dark, too quiet for 8 o'clock in the evening. His business trip to Chicago had ended a day early when the acquisition deal fell through, and all he wanted was to surprise his mother Eleanor with his early return and maybe share a warm cup of tea by the fireplace like they used to do when Sarah was still with them. As he stepped out of the car, his leather shoes crunched against the fresh snow that had begun accumulating on the walkway. That's when he heard it. A soft whimpering sound coming from somewhere near the front porch. Marcus paused, his briefcase halfway out of the back seat, straining to listen above the wind. The sound came again, weaker this time, like a wounded animal seeking shelter from the storm. His heart began racing as he followed the sound around the corner of the porch, and what he saw made his blood freeze colder than the winter air around him. There, huddled against the wooden railing in nothing but a thin cotton nightgown and worn slippers, sat his 74-year-old mother. Eleanor's silver hair was dusted with snow. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and her frail hands were wrapped around her knees as she rocked back and forth, trying to generate warmth in her trembling body. Marcus dropped his briefcase and rushed to her side, his expensive suit jacket already off his shoulders before he reached her. Eleanor, his mother, the woman who had raised him with infinite patience and unconditional love, looked up at him with eyes so filled with relief and fear that it broke something deep inside his chest. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, cracked and desperate. "Please, Marcus, please don't let her lock me out again. I tried to be good. I tried to stay quiet, but she said I was being too loud watching my stories on television. I have been out here since the sun went down, and my feet, oh, Marcus, I can't feel my feet anymore." The front door suddenly swung open, warm yellow light spilling across the snowy porch as Carmen appeared in the doorway. The housekeeper's expression shifted quickly from surprise to what Marcus could only describe as calculated concern, her dark eyes darting between him and Eleanor as if trying to assess how much trouble she might be facing. Carmen smoothed her black uniform and cleared her throat, preparing to speak with the same false sweetness she'd used for the past 18 months since he'd hired her to care for his mother. "Mr. Rodriguez, you're home early," Carmen said with that practiced smile that had once seemed so reassuring, but now felt like a mask hiding something sinister. "Your mother. She gets confused sometimes, especially in the evenings. She wandered outside on her own and must have forgotten how to get back inside. I was just about to come looking for her when I heard your car in the driveway." Marcus helped Eleanor to her feet, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders as her body continued to shake uncontrollably. The story didn't make sense. His mother had lived in this house for over a year now, and despite her age, Eleanor had never shown signs of the kind of confusion Carmen was describing. More importantly, the front door had clearly been locked from the inside, something that would have been impossible if his mother had simply wandered out on her own accord. Looking down at Eleanor's slippers, Marcus noticed they were bone dry on the bottom, despite the snow-covered porch, suggesting she hadn't been walking around outside, but had been sitting in that same spot for quite some time. The pieces of a disturbing puzzle were beginning to form in his mind, but he pushed those thoughts aside for now. His immediate concern was getting his mother warm and checking for signs of hypothermia or frostbite. Carmen stepped aside as Marcus guided Eleanor through the front door and into the warmth of the foyer. The house felt different somehow, though he couldn't immediately put his finger on what had changed. The familiar scent of Sarah's favorite vanilla candles was gone, replaced by an antiseptic smell that reminded him more of a hospital than a home. The family photographs that had lined the hallway table were missing, and the Afghan his late wife had crocheted for Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. "I think it would be best if you got some rest now, Mrs. Rodriguez," Carmen said to Eleanor, with firm authority that struck Marcus as inappropriate for someone addressing his mother. "Tomorrow we can discuss your evening walk with the doctor. Sometimes elderly people don't remember their actions clearly, especially when they're having one of their episodes." Episodes! Marcus looked sharply at Carmen, his protective instincts finally beginning to override his previous trust in the woman he'd hired to care for the most important person left in his world. "What episodes are you referring to?" "My mother has never had any kind of episodes, and she certainly wouldn't choose to sit outside in freezing weather, wearing nothing but a nightgown." The housekeeper's expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her concerned facade before she recovered her composure and continued with her explanation. Carmen folded her hands in front of her apron and adopted the patient tone one might use when explaining something obvious to a child. "Mr. Rodriguez, you've been traveling so much lately with your business expansion. There are things about your mother's condition that develop gradually, changes that become apparent when you're providing daily care, rather than seeing someone occasionally between trips." Marcus felt a surge of guilt wash over him as he helped Eleanor settle into the leather armchair by the fireplace. It was true that his travel schedule had become more demanding since Sarah's passing, partly because burying himself in work felt easier than facing the empty spaces his wife had left behind. But the woman shivering in his arms was still sharp, still herself, still the mother who could recall stories from his childhood with perfect clarity, and who never forgot to ask about his business meetings when he called home. As he knelt beside Eleanor's chair, adjusting the throw blanket around her shoulders, he noticed something that made his stomach clench with worry. Dark purple bruises marked her wrists, finger-shaped marks that looked like someone had gripped her arms with considerable force. When he gently touched her hand to examine the bruising more closely, Eleanor winced and pulled away, her eyes darting nervously toward Carmen before looking down at her lap. "Those are from her falls," Carmen explained quickly, noticing the direction of Marcus's gaze. "Your mother has become increasingly unsteady on her feet. Just last week, she fell in the bathroom, and I had to help her up. Sometimes when elderly people are confused or frightened, they resist assistance, and you have to be firm to prevent them from injuring themselves further." But Eleanor had always been remarkably steady for her age, and Marcus remembered her taking pride in her daily walks around the neighborhood even after moving in with him. Something about Carmen's explanation felt rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing for this moment, anticipating that someone might eventually notice and question the evidence of rough handling. Eleanor reached up with trembling fingers and touched Marcus's cheek, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire he'd just lit. "I missed you so much, mijo. I kept hoping you'd come home soon. The house gets so quiet when you're away, and sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm becoming invisible even to myself." The raw pain in his mother's voice cut through Marcus like a blade. This wasn't the confusion of dementia or the natural complaints of aging. This was the voice of someone who had been isolated, silenced, and made to feel powerless in what should have been her sanctuary. Carmen cleared her throat impatiently, clearly eager to end this reunion and return Eleanor to whatever routine had been established in Marcus's absence. The next morning brought crisp sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as Marcus sat across from Eleanor at the breakfast table, really observing his mother for the first time in months. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loose on her frame, as if she'd lost significant weight. When Carmen placed a bowl of plain oatmeal in front of Eleanor, Marcus noticed his mother's slight flinch at the housekeeper's proximity, a reaction so subtle he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching carefully. Marcus had spent most of the night lying awake, replaying Carmen's explanations and trying to reconcile them with his own memories of his mother's capabilities and personality. Eleanor had always been a vibrant woman who enjoyed reading mystery novels, tending to her small herb garden, and calling her sister in Phoenix every Sunday afternoon. The withdrawn, frightened person sitting beside him bore little resemblance to the strong woman who had helped him navigate the darkest period of his grief after Sarah's death. When Carmen stepped out to answer the doorbell, Eleanor leaned closer to Marcus and whispered urgently, as if afraid of being overheard. "She takes my books away and says reading will strain my eyes. She locks my bedroom door at night and tells me it's for my own safety, but I know she just doesn't want me wandering around the house. Yesterday, she threw away the letters your father wrote to me during the war, said they were just cluttering up my dresser drawer." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, like a pressure cooker reaching its limit. Those letters had been treasures to his mother, precious reminders of a love story that had lasted 47 years until his father's passing. No caregiver, no matter how well-intentioned, had the right to make such personal decisions about his mother's belongings without consultation. Carmen returned carrying a package delivery, her pleasant mask sliding back into place as she rejoined them in the kitchen. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you shouldn't be bothering your son with your stories. He has important business matters to worry about, and he doesn't need to hear about your little mix-ups and confusions." But Eleanor straightened in her chair with a flash of the dignity Marcus remembered, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor of fear that still ran underneath. "These aren't stories, Carmen. These are things that happened, things you did. Marcus needed to know, and I'm glad he's finally home to see for himself what's been going on in this house." The tension in the kitchen became thick enough to cut, and Marcus found himself studying Carmen's face as she processed this small act of defiance from the woman she'd apparently been systematically intimidating and controlling. Later that afternoon, while Carmen was supposedly running errands at the grocery store, Marcus decided to search through Sarah's belongings for something Eleanor had mentioned during their quiet breakfast conversation. His late wife had been meticulous about documentation, keeping detailed notes about everything from household repairs to family medical history. If there were concerns about Eleanor's care or well-being, Sarah would have written them down somewhere. In the cedar chest at the foot of their bedroom closet, beneath Sarah's carefully folded sweaters that still carried the faint scent of her perfume, Marcus found a manila envelope with his name written in his wife's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before Sarah's unexpected passing from a heart attack that had shattered his world and left him feeling lost in his own life. "My dearest Marcus," Sarah had written, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to watch over our family the way I always promised I would. I need you to know that I'm worried about what will happen to Eleanor when she needs more care than we can provide ourselves. Please be very careful about who you trust with her well-being. There are people in this world who see elderly individuals as opportunities rather than human beings deserving of respect and dignity." The letter continued with specific instructions about maintaining Eleanor's independence, preserving her daily routines, and ensuring that anyone hired to help would understand the importance of treating her like family rather than a burden. Sarah had even included a list of warning signs to watch for: isolation from friends and family, unexplained injuries, sudden changes in personality or behavior, missing personal belongings, and fear of caregivers. Marcus read through the list with growing horror as he realized that Eleanor was exhibiting every single warning sign Sarah had identified. His wife's intuition and protective instincts had extended beyond her own lifetime, and he'd ignored her guidance in his rush to find a solution that would allow him to continue working without worrying about his mother's daily needs. The most chilling part of Sarah's letter came in the final paragraph. "Remember that predators often present themselves as the perfect solution to your problems. They volunteer for extra responsibilities. They seem more dedicated than other candidates, and they make you feel guilty for questioning their methods. Trust your instincts, my love, And never let anyone make you feel like you're being unreasonable for wanting to protect the people you love. As footsteps echoed in the hallway downstairs, Marcus quickly returned the letter to its envelope and placed Sarah's belongings back in the chest. Carmen had returned from her errands, and he could hear her moving around in the kitchen, probably preparing Eleanor's dinner with the same controlling precision she seemed to apply to every aspect of his mother's daily life. Over the following weeks, Marcus began working from his home office more frequently, telling Carmen he needed to focus on local projects while secretly observing the dynamics between his housekeeper and his mother. What he witnessed during those careful hours of observation filled him with a rage he'd never experienced before, not even during the darkest days of his grief. Carmen's behavior toward Eleanor changed dramatically depending on whether Marcus was present or not. When he was in the room, she maintained her facade of professional caring, speaking to Eleanor with exaggerated patience and ensuring his mother had everything she needed. But when Carmen thought Marcus was out of earshot, her tone became sharp and condescending, filled with subtle threats and reminders of Eleanor's supposed helplessness. One particularly revealing incident occurred on a Thursday afternoon when Marcus had supposedly left for a meeting, but had actually parked around the corner and re-entered through the back door. He positioned himself where he could see into the living room while remaining hidden, and what he witnessed made his hands shake with fury. Carmen had been folding laundry when Eleanor asked if she could call her sister in Phoenix, a weekly tradition that had brought his mother comfort for years. The housekeeper's response was swift and cruel, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper as she moved closer to Eleanor's chair. "Your sister doesn't want to hear from you anymore, old woman. She told me herself that you repeat the same stories over and over, and she's tired of pretending to care about your boring little life. Besides, long-distance calls are expensive, and Mr. Rodriguez doesn't need you running up unnecessary bills with your nonsense conversations." Marcus watched as his mother's face crumpled with hurt and confusion, her hand dropping away from the telephone she'd been reaching for. Eleanor had been calling her sister Rebecca every Sunday for over 60 years, and the two women shared a bond that had sustained them through marriages, children, loss, and aging. To suggest that Rebecca no longer wanted contact was not just cruel but completely untrue, as Marcus knew his aunt still asked about Eleanor whenever they spoke. The psychological manipulation didn't stop there. Carmen continued her assault on Eleanor's sense of reality by rearranging familiar objects when his mother wasn't looking, then expressing concern about Eleanor's memory when she couldn't find things. She would promise to help Eleanor with activities like gardening or reading, then create emergencies or schedule conflicts that prevented those activities from happening, gradually isolating his mother from everything that had previously brought her joy and purpose. Marcus began keeping a detailed journal of these incidents, photographing the bruises that appeared on Eleanor's arms and documenting the times when his mother was denied basic comforts or freedoms. The confrontation Marcus had been building toward finally came on a snowy February evening when he arrived home to find Eleanor locked in her bedroom while Carmen entertained a male visitor in the living room. The man appeared to be going through the family's valuable items, examining silver candlesticks and evaluating artwork with the practiced eye of someone assessing their worth for resale. Marcus entered through the back door and made his way upstairs where he could hear Eleanor calling softly for help from behind her locked bedroom door. When he unlocked the door with the master key he'd kept hidden in his office, he found his mother sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a small framed photograph of his father. "She took my wedding ring, Marcus," Eleanor whispered, holding up her bare left hand. "Carmen said it was too valuable to leave on my finger because I might lose it or forget where I put it. She promised to keep it safe, but I heard her on the phone talking about getting it appraised. That ring never left my finger for 53 years, not even when I was in the hospital having you." The theft of his mother's wedding ring represented a violation so profound that Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. This wasn't just about elder abuse or neglect anymore. This was about a systematic campaign to strip away Eleanor's dignity, her memories, and her connection to the life she'd built with his father. Carmen had been erasing his mother piece by piece, stealing not just her belongings, but her sense of self-worth and belonging in her own home. Marcus helped Eleanor to her feet and guided her toward the door, speaking in a voice that shook with barely controlled anger. "We're going downstairs now, Mom, and you're going to tell Carmen exactly what you just told me. You're going to ask for your wedding ring back, and you're going to do it in front of her friend, who's been helping her inventory our family's possessions." The descent down the stairs felt like walking toward a final battle, with Eleanor's hand gripping his arm for support and courage. In the living room, Carmen and her accomplice froze when they saw Marcus and Eleanor appear together, their expressions shifting from confident entitlement to trapped desperation as they realized their schemes had been discovered. Carmen's visitor quickly set down the silver picture frame he'd been examining and headed for the front door, clearly unwilling to be present for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Carmen, however, stood her ground, her chin raised defiantly as she prepared to defend her actions with the same manipulative tactics she'd been using to control Eleanor. Carmen's transformation was immediate and startling. Gone was the submissive, caring housekeeper she'd pretended to be for 18 months. In her place stood a woman whose eyes blazed with resentment and whose voice carried the sharp edge of someone who felt cornered and dangerous. She crossed her arms over her chest and glared at both Marcus and Eleanor with unconcealed hostility. "You have no idea what it's like dealing with her every single day," Carmen spat, pointing an accusing finger at Eleanor. "She's demanding. She complains about everything. And she treats me like I'm her personal servant instead of a professional caregiver. I've sacrificed my own life to take care of your precious mother. And this is the gratitude I get? Accusations and suspicion from a son who's never home long enough to understand what really goes on here?" Marcus stepped protectively in front of Eleanor, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his chest. "You're right about one thing, Carmen. I wasn't home enough to see what you were really doing to my mother. But I'm here now, and I want my mother's wedding ring back immediately. I also want you to explain why there were bruises on her arms, why she was locked outside in freezing weather, and why your friend was evaluating our family heirlooms like he was pricing them for an estate sale." The evidence was overwhelming, and Carmen seemed to realize that her position was no longer defensible. Her strategy shifted from denial to justification, as if she could make Marcus understand that her actions had been reasonable responses to impossible circumstances. She began pacing the living room, her voice rising with each accusation she hurled. "Your mother is more work than you realize, and you certainly don't pay me enough to deal with her constant needs and complaints. She wanders around at night, she hides things, and then accuses me of stealing them. And she tells lies about our interactions because she wants attention. The ring is in a safe place because she kept trying to flush it down the toilet. Everything I've done has been to protect her from herself and to maintain some order in this house." Eleanor found her voice then, speaking with a strength that surprised both Marcus and Carmen. "My dear, I may be old, but I'm not foolish, and I'm certainly not crazy. You took my ring because you needed money for whatever debts or problems you're facing in your own life. You locked me outside because you wanted me to know how powerless I was in my own home. You isolated me from my friends and family because you didn't want anyone asking questions about how you were treating me." The truth hung in the air between them like a weapon that had finally been drawn after months of silent warfare. Carmen's composure finally cracked completely, as she realized that both Marcus and Eleanor saw through her manipulations. She pulled Eleanor's wedding ring from her pocket and threw it onto the coffee table with such force that it bounced and rolled across the hardwood floor. Her face contorted with years of bitterness and resentment as she unleashed a torrent of cruel words that revealed the depth of her psychological cruelty. You want to know the truth? Fine. I hate taking care of selfish old people who think the world owes them comfort and respect just because they managed to live a long time. Your mother is a burden, Marcus, a drain on your resources and your life, and instead of appreciating that I kept her out of your way, you're treating me like a criminal. You rich people are all the same, thinking you can buy loyalty and dedication without understanding what it costs to actually provide care. Marcus bent to retrieve his mother's ring, slipping it gently back onto Eleanor's finger where it belonged. The simple gold band, worn smooth by decades of love and daily wear, seemed to restore something essential to his mother's sense of self. Eleanor's shoulders straightened as she looked down at her restored wedding ring, and when she raised her eyes to meet Carmen's glare, there was no fear left in her expression. The next few hours moved with the efficiency of long-delayed justice. Marcus contacted the local police to report the theft and elder abuse, providing them with the photographs and documentation he'd been gathering. Carmen was escorted from the house while officers took statements from both Marcus and Eleanor, and arrangements were made for a complete investigation into the scope of Carmen's activities. A thorough search of Carmen's belongings revealed not only additional stolen items from the Rodriguez household, but also evidence that Eleanor wasn't her first victim. Phone records and personal notes suggested she'd been systematically targeting elderly clients, gradually gaining their trust before isolating them and stealing from them. The investigation would eventually connect her to similar patterns of abuse in 3 other households where she'd worked as a caregiver. As evening fell and the house grew quiet again, Marcus sat beside Eleanor on the couch where they'd spent so many comfortable hours when Sarah was alive. The photograph of his father was back in its place on Eleanor's bedside table. Her books were returned to their shelf, and her wedding ring caught the light from the fireplace as she held Marcus's hand. The healing would take time, but for the first time in months, the house felt like home again rather than a prison where his mother had been held captive by someone who was supposed to protect her. 2 years later, on a warm spring morning that filled their garden with the scent of blooming roses, Marcus knelt beside Eleanor as they planted new herbs in the raised beds Sarah had designed but never lived to see completed. His mother's hands, steady and sure as they worked the rich soil, showed no trace of the fear that had once made her flinch at unexpected movements. The laughter that bubbled up between them as they debated the proper spacing for the basil plants was a sound that had taken months to return, but now felt as natural as breathing. Eleanor had not only recovered her physical health, but had rediscovered the joy and purpose that Carmen had tried so systematically to steal from her. She was volunteering at the local senior center, sharing her story with other elderly individuals and their families to help them recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Her weekly phone calls with her sister Rebecca had resumed, filled with the comfortable gossip and shared memories that had sustained their relationship for over 6 decades. Marcus had restructured his business to allow for more time at home, realizing that success without family connection was just elaborate loneliness dressed up in expensive suits and impressive financial statements. He'd learned to cook Eleanor's favorite recipes, and their Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition that filled their dining room with warmth and conversation that honored Sarah's memory while creating new traditions for their smaller but stronger family unit. The legal proceedings against Carmen had concluded with her conviction on multiple charges of elder abuse, theft, and fraud. She was serving a prison sentence that would keep her away from vulnerable elderly individuals for years to come. And the civil lawsuit had recovered not only the stolen items, but also compensation for the emotional damage she'd inflicted. More importantly, her prosecution had led to stronger oversight regulations for in-home caregivers and better protection protocols for elderly clients. On quiet evenings when they sat together reading or watching Eleanor's beloved mystery shows, Marcus often thought about Sarah's letter and her wisdom about protecting the people you love. The experience had taught him that evil often wears a mask of helpfulness, that predators seek out moments of vulnerability and trust, but that good people who stand together with courage and determination can overcome even the most calculated cruelty. As Eleanor watered their new plants with obvious satisfaction, Marcus realized that justice hadn't just been about Carmen's punishment. True justice had been about restoring his mother's dignity, rebuilding their family bonds, and creating a home where love and respect flourished, like the herbs growing strong in the afternoon sunlight. The Maldade had indeed been punished, the good had been rewarded, and their justice had been built with truth, courage, and the kind of unconditional love that transforms both the protected and the protector.